Hello and welcome to the Australian Roundtable Podcast. It is Sunday the 25th of January 2015. This is episode 16 of our weekly broadcast live at youtube.com/Australian Roundtable from 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time every Sunday, and also archived at ozroundtable.com for later listening. I'm your host Johnno, and I'm joined in the studio as usual by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
And today we are pleased to announce the return of the ARP's wise old elder. He joins us via Google Hangout. Welcome back to the show, Lindsay the Silverfox.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be back, actually. I've missed it.
It's good to have you back, mate. And now today, for the first time, we introduce to the show an international guest, a man who needs little introduction, but we'll get one anyway. Also joining us via Google Hangout is FreeRadioRevolution's Jeff C. Thanks for setting your alarm clock correctly this time, Jeff, and thanks for being here.
It's very, very nice to be here, and yes, I mean, halfway around the world it can be trouble sometimes coordinating things, but now we know, so I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now we'll get to a proper introduction for you and a reintroduction for Lindsay in a few moments, but first I'll just read out this little blurb for any new listeners who might be new to the show. The Australian Roundtable Podcast is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion panel podcast which broadcasts live every Sunday from 4 p.m. Episodes are available to listen to live and also archived for later listening at the Australian YouTube channel and our website, ozroundtable.com. Live listeners can also take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts, and there are plenty of people in there right now. The show features an eclectic panel of presenters who come together each week to discuss recent and topical news and current affairs from Australia and around the world, and provides an alternative perspective to that provided by the mainstream media. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and each presenter is solely responsible for his or her own comments and claims. All important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site, ozroundtable.com, so you can verify and analyse it for yourself, which I, for one, recommend you do. Episodes generally run to 90 minutes, but today we'll be going for 2 hours, given the guests that we've got on the show and everything we've got to talk about. It is a roundtable discussion, but we try to keep to a rough structure for each episode and generally break it up into a domestic and international segment. Today we'll be doing things a little bit differently, with a general focus on the key topics of freedom of expression and internet censorship. Now, that said, I'll give you a basic idea of how the show's going to run today. We'll start off with our first segment. We'll be discussing Australians who've been censored in the recent past, and we'll specifically touch on Brendan O'Connell, Fredrick Toben, and Mike Carlton. In the second sub-segment, we'll have a broader discussion about internet censorship and freedom of speech from an international perspective, and that's where I'm sure Jeff will have plenty to offer us today. And if we do have time, we'll have a third sub-segment where we just give some updates on some recent topics like the anti-terror funding in Australia, those fake ISIS beheadings, which we've just got another edition of, and the quantitative easing in the European Union, touching on what we discussed on last week's episode. So that's enough from me for now. We'll get straight to you, Lindsay. And since you were last on the show, our viewer base has grown 200%. So lots of our listeners don't really know a great deal about you, mate. So please spend a few minutes now just giving the audience an idea of who you are, the things you're interested in, and what you hope to get from the show.
Okay. I've been interested in this sort of thing for quite a long time, and I was associated with the Invril Forum. Now, many people won't know what that was, but it was a forum along the lines of what this our podcast is, and it had anywhere from 200 to 300 people would come from all around Australia. I've been interested in this. I've found that most of the people I talk to really don't want to know anything about it. At one stage, my family thought I was a nutcase, but my 2 daughters are pretty much coming on side, because as they've grown up and gone out into the world, they're suddenly finding all the things we've been bumping our head against, they are bumping their head against. So in some ways, that's quite pleasing for me. I'm looking after an elderly mother, so I really don't have much time to do anything else. I'm pretty much here 24/7, but that's the nature of things.
Lindsay, one of the reasons why when I first met you I thought I had to get you onto this show was because you offer a perspective that people like myself and Ethan and a lot of people who are in our audience don't have because we're younger. You've actually seen what's happened to our societies in your lifetime, and I don't know if you want to give away your exact age on the show, but the point is, you're someone who can say with good reason that things have gotten worse, markedly so in the last 20 or 30 years because you've been there firsthand to witness it.
Yes, and I don't want to get too carried away with it because I've got a tendency to repeat myself. As I'm getting older and getting a bit more senile, I tend to repeat myself. but I can say probably 30 years ago, I was in a country town, and nearly every vehicle in the street would be a Land Cruiser, and they would all have a rifle behind the back seat. Now, if anybody hears a firecracker, they're calling the police because somebody's got a gun. So I've seen it change in that time. And also to the other extreme, that in those days, police didn't wear guns. The first time I saw a policeman with a gun, I was absolutely horrified. Nowadays, at the G20, there were people with machine guns. So the people have lost firepower and the authorities have gained firepower. That's one of the biggest things that I've noticed in my lifetime.
Yeah, we've spoken in previous episodes about the militarization of police and how bad it's got, but you're actually someone who's actually experienced that, where we're just looking at it from a historical perspective, Lindsay. It just seems like more and more so the militarization of police is becoming more prevalent, but it's been incremented over time, where it didn't just pop out in front of you and say, you know, here I am. It's been incremented over time slowly, and now it's just been accepted, which nobody in their right mind should have to deal with.
No, but it's not just the militarization of police. There are a whole lot of other things to do with immigration and a whole lot of other things that have come in incrementally, and now the generation now just accepted it as this is the way it is, whereas no, it was never like that.
Yeah,
Okay,
and obviously on this show, we've spent a lot of time looking at changes to the laws and all of these anti-terror legislation bills that have passed Parliament. Another thing that we looked at back when you were a regular on the show, Lindsay, was changes to our culture and society. And one instance that we have discussed in previous episodes, if listeners want to go back through our archive and check it out, was discussing what we now call feminism. Of course, it was second wave feminism and identity politics. And that's another one of the things that I like having older people on the show is you remember a time when gender roles were different and they weren't demonized. I mean, just a few months ago here in Australia, we had a senator saying that parents shouldn't buy boys' toys for boys or girls' toys for girls. And back when you were our age, I'm sure that would have been laughed out of town. But now that gets on our television. There are people who actually believe this stuff.
Yeah, I must confess that as a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old, the people who were going on with this sort of stuff, it was laughable. I can remember Germaine Greer coming in, and all the young girls were all pushing this Germaine Greer book at us, The Female Eunuch, and we read it and we thought this is just drivel. So things have changed, whereas that's the way it was then. It's got to the point now where all this has now been accepted and is actually being enforced with law. I've spoken before about the changes to boys' education that was brought in New South Wales. Exactly the same things. They brought it in with the force of the feminist philosophy behind it, and that was then implemented by the New South Wales government. So yes, things have changed dramatically.
And as the father of two girls, and as we've discussed, a man who's lived through to see all of this, I think you're perfectly placed to say to people, you know what you're talking about, and whereas people might disparage the younger generation who don't know what it was like in the past, well, you do, and that's why we're so glad to have you back on the show. So thanks for joining us again, and we'll get into discussing a lot of things that I know you know a lot about when we get to our first sub-segment. But before we do, we have to give an introduction to our special guest, Jeff C. Now, Jeff, when we get a new guest on the show, we like to give them a few minutes to give us a basic background on what they're doing with themselves right now, how they got into this movement, if you want to call it that, when they first started realizing they were being lied to, the whole shebang. So if you want to give us a few minutes of your time and give the listeners who aren't already familiar with you a basic idea of who you are and how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, my name is Jeff C. I'm the host of Free Radio Revolution. I also host a number of other podcasts, including We'll Do It Live. And I've been a truther always, pretty much, ever since I was a boy. I questioned everything. I hated television. I always thought it was mind control. And when I was in college, what they call CEGEP here in Quebec, I started doing courses in media manipulation and all that. So I really had an awakening back then to how we were being manipulated by the corporate media on a daily basis. So I've always been very skeptical. 9/11 obviously had a huge impact on me. I always thought that it was something that they allowed to happen, and then eventually when I saw the Building 7 tapes, I think it was 2006 or 7, I can't remember exactly when, I came to the realization that they had actually done it themselves. And that was a difficult sort of bridge to cross, obviously. I think a lot of people go through that sort of awakening. So eventually, I've always been this type of guy that would hang out with buddies in bars and really discuss politics all the time, things that were happening in the world, and criticize the media, criticize world leaders, what was going on, sort of thing, the banks, of course. And so it was kind of a natural extension to start Free Radio Revolution. We kind of started it as a group show where we got together, kind of like you guys are tonight, where we were starting off with 4 guys in a room, just sitting around a microphone, just shooting the SCA. Well, I don't want to swear, so you know what I'm saying. But we would sit around and discuss all these things. And eventually, I was doing all the work, and really, it was a lot of burden on me. So it became more of a solo show at a point, after about a year or so, and then I started to do a lot more stuff on my own, and eventually I started branching out with other truthers, people like Red Pill Revolution, is better known as Truth Media Revolution now, and up north of 49th, so many other great people, and about a year ago we started all working together and bringing as many people in as possible and trying to help create a sort of new movement within this truther sort of community. And we really focused a lot on false flags. I think I was one of the first ones kind of to be a Sandy Hook truther, and I also, did a lot of work on Boston, which I also believe is a hoax, and many other events, Navy Yards, the Lax shooting, so many others. So I really kind of cut my teeth on false flags and hoaxes and media manipulation. It's one of my favorite topics to cover on Free Radio Revolution, is the corporate media and the alternative media. I'd really like to expose what their tactics and what they're up to and how they're manipulating people. So now I'm working with so many other people, and so happy to be on a show like this, and it's just kind of a natural evolution to be here, and I'm very comfortable to be here with all you guys from down under tonight.
No, it's fantastic. It's great to have you on. We appreciate you coming on and bringing the audience with you to the live chat. You mentioned that you did course or study on media manipulation, and when I was being trained as a journalist here in Brisbane, I also had to go through the thing, and that's one thing I tell people. They actually train future journalists how to do it. So how can you deny that it actually does happen in the media? But in terms of alternative media, that's one of the reasons I went into alternative media here in Australia. I just wanted to ask you, what has the response been, or how have you noticed the response from when you started to now in terms of the awakening of the audience, of subscribers, of people to collaborate with? How do you see that evolution? Because I know when I've started, it was nowhere like this. So I'm interested to get your input on that.
Yeah, it's been quite something. I think in many ways that 9/11 was the beginning of the sort of truth movement. I know that you had JFK and many other psyops before that, Oklahoma City bombing, so many other things, but really 9/11 sort of triggered an awakening. And I think in many ways Sandy Hook was almost a second awakening, that people didn't really suspect that these school shootings were being faked or staged. So when that came out, and the alternative media that was established at the point completely refused to cover it, just giving it a gloss over and basically trumpeting the corporate media story, that's when a sort of new movement came out of what was the truth movement then. And I think we've seen a huge evolution since then, and what we see is a lot more people that, I think when I first started, you had the established channels. I remember the big We Are Change and AMTV, and of course InfoHorse, and many others. Well, not so many others. Mark Dice, people like that you couldn't reach these people. You couldn't. I remember when Sandy Hook was happening, I was trying to reach them and hit them with information, and I was pretty small back then. So it took a lot of, when I first started getting a lot of subs is when I started covering Sandy Hook. Now, we first started covering it as a group, but I really started working alone on that, and I got deep inside the rabbit hole, and I noticed a lot more people were subscribing to my channel, so I started covering more of the false flags. It just became a natural sort of interest for me, because they started pulling off so many of them, and partially it's not that they were necessarily doing something new. I mean, we had Aurora before Sandy Hook, Tucson. There's many other psyops that have occurred prior to that, but I think Sandy Hook was so shocking and so obvious that that created a whole new movement within the movement. And what happened was I started covering all the false flags, and there was a few other channels at the same time that were doing. I can think of the Paul Stahl Service and Team Wake 'em Up, people like that I have a lot of respect for, and they're friends of mine. We were all kind of covering the same thing at that time, and we went from story to story basically, because every couple of weeks there would be something new that would be another stage thing. And yeah, there's been an evolution. There's been a lot of people waking up to it. There's now I can see, like especially now I can see. I was just on another live show before this, and many of these people I've known as subscribers now are creating their own shows, which is just wonderful to see, because it means they're taking in the extra step and they really want to get involved. And I think that's one of the things that myself and Truth Media Films up north of the 49th, people I first started working with in group sessions, really wanted to see happen. And what we were trying to do with the roundtable discussions that we were having is to try to bring more people and get more people to do the the exact same type of work with their own sort of style. So we've seen a real sort of explosion of activity, and it's very it's very nice to see this, I have to say. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of great things that are happening within the truther community.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I'm sure you're not too humble a man to accept this compliment, Jeff. You're one of the leaders, if you like, on YouTube at the moment in terms of getting material out there, not just quickly, but generally pretty accurate stuff. There are people who try and get it out straight away and often make mistakes and almost do this movement a disservice. Then there are other people who are a bit more tardy and they wait weeks or months before they upload really detailed stuff that breaks things down. You're one of the people who gets stuff out pretty quickly and generally calls it accurately most times, more often than not. And you're one of the unofficial leaders, if you like, of the circles that you move in. My question for you is, given that this is such a big part of your life now, do you remember what stage it was when you realized that this was going to go from a passing interest of yours to something that you'd put so much of your time and effort into?
It's hard to say, because I can't explain why I have such a hunger to do this. I think a lot of us are like this. We just know that they're duping us, and we know that a lot of bad things are going on, and that we can't trust the media that's put in front of us. So, I mean, I can't really say why or when I started to realize. I think when Sandy Hook happened, I started to feel it then. I mean, I felt like a bit of a leader in the day, because many of the people that I still have tremendous respect for and still work with occasionally, and I'm definitely in their circles, were looking to me to put out videos and feeding me all kinds of information. And it was the community started then. I just think that we didn't have the pieces in place to work together cohesively as a unit, and that happened over time. So yeah, I can't really pinpoint. I think it's always been like, ever since I started doing this, even back doing the group sessions with my good buddies Paul and Greg, of course, who are still very close, and we still get together and chat all the time. So, but yeah, we always had this tremendous passion for it, and I think it's like a bug. You get hit, it just bites you, and you can't let it go. You just keep on it, and I'm just so happy to see so many more people coming on board and helping people like myself, because alone, there's no way. I mean, there is no way, and that 1 or 2 or 12 or 15 or 25 or 100 people are going to be able to turn the tide. We need as many hands on deck. So I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do is really encourage as many people to get involved as possible.
Well, later in the show, we're going to discuss different vested interest attempts to shut this kind of discussion down, and that'll all filter into discussion about internet censorship. But focusing more on you, Jeff, I've just got a couple of more questions following on from that one that we just discussed. You know, you took up this mantelpiece of being one of, and there are many people, you're not the only one, there are many people, like you said, Team Wake 'em Up and Red Pill and Kate Slade, and there's a whole bunch of people doing good work. When you decided, or when you started realizing you're putting so much time into this work, into this movement, if you like, can you tell us a little bit about how that changed your relationships with maybe your friends or your family or your co-workers, and I guess how the work that you're doing right now has impacted other parts of your life?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, obviously there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice. You know, I don't exercise like I used to. I don't have the social life like I used to. I mean, you sacrifice a lot. I mean, my social life is a lot more active online than it is in reality, and that's one of the sacrifices. You have to pay a price to be as, you know, active as someone like myself is. I tend to be a workaholic, so I'm one of these guys that will often be up late and not getting enough sleep, and you know, work suffers, a lot of different things suffer, relationships suffer, obviously, friends and family. You know, I think every one of us that go through this period of awakening and try, obviously the first thing we try to do is inform other people, because we're like, well, we've discovered something and everybody else should know what we discovered and understand how they are being manipulated. And obviously every single one of us will run into roadblocks when we try to you know, reach family or friends, because there's a change. I mean, you go through a change once you do wake up and you start, you know, once you accept, say, the fact that 9/11 was an inside job. That's a huge paradigm shift. That is a massive paradigm shift, and I think a lot of people never want to cross that bridge. They don't want to even entertain that because it would change too much. It would change their entire worldview. And then if you know, you believe that, well then what haven't they done? And where throughout history haven't they manipulated us? So you start to question everything. So yes, obviously it has a huge impact, and some of it's very positive. I think the positive thing is that I know people all around the world now, and like yourself, I mean, we're literally on opposite sides of the world communicating and having you know, live discussions, so that's wonderful. You know, I've never met so many people, though I don't meet them in the flesh usually. Sometimes I do, but for the most part, no. I only know them through their voices or their avatars or just their faces on the computer. But nonetheless, the relationships are very strong and very real. So I like to think some of my best friends right now are doing this type of work, and people that I you know, constantly in contact with, and constantly, you know, we have all these huge discussions often off air where, you know, we have a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, you know, even a few drinks, and you know, there's wonderful things about this community. There's just a real hunger out there for people to be a part of it and understand that they're doing something positive, because you know, helping humanity is a very positive thing. It really is when you think about it. And you know, if you're just spreading fear, of course that's a trap that some people could easily fall into, where you think the world's going to end, and you know, every video you're making is about whatever the latest doom might be. That's what I try to avoid completely, and I try to just focus on how the manipulation is occurring and all that. So yeah, there's a lot of sacrifice obviously in this, but there's a lot of rewards, so it's a give and take.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you for that little background on yourself there, Jeff. Obviously on We'll Do It Live, and to a lesser extent Mass Resistance, there's more of an emphasis on having fun and having a general chat, and I think that's so important for this movement, that people can tune in and listen to other people like themselves with similar ideas, and just have a general jocular chat about what's going on. Because really, you've got to, once you realize what's going on with the government and the people who are behind the government and what they have planned for us, you've basically got two choices, and one is to laugh and one is to cry. And I think one of the great strengths of the shows that you're involved in is because there is this emphasis on having a good time and having a laugh, and it's one of the things that made me interested in listening to you guys in the first place, and then teaming up with Ethan and Lindsay and starting our own show. I do want to say to the listeners who are joining us for the first time, we do generally try and be a bit more jocular and lighthearted on the show. Ethan, I think right now we're struggling a little bit because of the technical difficulties we're having here in the studio. We usually actually broadcast from a studio where we're all in the same room, and it's a lot easier to converse and to throw to each other and to get the whole show to run smoothly. So if you're just tuning in, trust me, we're going to get a bit more fun and lighthearted soon. But we're just making our way through this Google Hangout business, which Jeff C knows so much more about than us. And are you still with us, Lindsay?
Yes, I'm still here.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to move on to the first structured segment of the day, and that's to discuss a number of Australians who've been censored in this country in recent history. Of course, today's general theme is discussing internet censorship and just censorship in general, the destruction of freedom of speech. And that works out so well having Jeff C on the show, because as he'll discuss later, he's been directly impacted by it. But we're going to start off today looking at from an Australian perspective and looking at three people in particular: Brendan O'Connell, Fredrick Toben, and Mike Carlton. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give the background to Brendan O'Connell, and then Lindsay, you can tell us more about him because I know that you've been following his story for a while. I'll give the background right now. Brendan O'Connell is an Australian. I think he's from Perth. He was jailed in 2009 for an incident where he was alleged to have been anti-Semitic towards two Jewish men. He was found guilty on charges in 2011, sentenced to 11 years jail, but he was allowed to serve the 6 charges concurrently, so he only did 3 years, for saying the wrong thing. And you can check out more information about him. We'll provide links on AusRoundtable.com, just like we always do. Now, I'm going to read out verbatim something from an article from 2011 just to describe what happened. So listeners, if you are new to the Australian Roundtable, we do spend a bit of time giving backgrounds to the stories before we discuss them, so I thank you for your patience in advance. This is from a Yahoo 7 article called Video Rants, an Echo of Pre-War Europe, February 7, 2011. Quote, "It didn't take long to realise this was no ordinary trial. Within minutes of the jury filing into the courtroom, the defendant, Brendan O'Connell, fired his lawyer, declared the court without jurisdiction, and attempted to arrest the judge for treason. There were stifled giggles from the public gallery, but O'Connell is no comedy act. Last Monday, the 40-year-old former registered nurse was sentenced to 3 years jail for racial vilification for views expressed in his online blog. For more than 2 years, O'Connell has waged an online campaign against Perth Jews, posting long, rambling, anti-Semitic diatribes and videos across the internet. His hate campaign eventually culminated in a video he made of himself chasing 21-year-old Jewish man Stanley Kaiser down a South Perth street, accusing him of being a racist, homicidal maniac. O'Connell referred to 3 books throughout the trial: the Bible, the Australian Constitution, and an anti-Semitic tome called Judaism Discovered. It is the first time in WA that someone has been jailed for racial vilification, an offence introduced by the State Parliament in 2007. In the video of him chasing Mr. Kaiser down the street yelling abuse, which prompted a shift in thinking about O'Connell from a fringe lunatic to a serious threat. The film was taken at a Friends of Palestine protest outside a South Perth supermarket on May 2, 2009. O'Connell went along to take part in a protest against the sale of Israeli fruit. Mr. Kaiser and Timothy Peach, who were members of the Australian Union of Jewish Students, went to the protest intending to hand out pamphlets with an opposing point of view. But as the protest was small and peaceful, they instead decided to take a photo and leave. In the paranoid mind of O'Connell, however, they were Israeli spies sent to gather information. The film shows O'Connell yelling at Mr. Kaiser that Judaism is a religion of racism, hate, homicide, and ethnic cleansing. He then filmed himself at the bell tower calling Judaism a death cult. O'Connell may be in jail, but his supporters still spew their racist hate online, and Mr. Kaiser is still feeling its effect. Though he has not been physically harmed, Mr. Kaiser said O'Connell's views were menacing. "We live in Perth and in a great country, but we also lived in freedom in Germany in the 1930s, and then all of a sudden there was the Holocaust," Mr. Kaiser said. "My grandmother, her entire family died in the Holocaust, and when she was in court, she couldn't deal with it because the things that were being said were exactly what happened in Poland. The same comments, same theories, and it was horrible and horrific." End quote. So thanks for the patience there, listeners. That was an article. Again, the links are all provided on AusRoundtable.com. Now, there are many things that could be said about this one single article, and I've only read out portions of it. But here's a few points I want to make before I throw over to Lindsay. Point 1, notice the use of terms like lunatic, fringe, comedy act, paranoid to discredit O'Connell. Notice the use of the terms racist, hate, abuse, diatribe, rant, demonize O'Connell. Notice the disparity between what the article claims O'Connell did, that he chased the so-called victims while yelling abuse, and what the video footage actually shows. And again, the link to that video clip will be on our website. I encourage viewers to check it out for themselves. Notice that the article derided O'Connell for describing Judaism as a death cult, and especially our Australian listeners, ask where you've been hearing the term death cult lately. Notice that the article described Judaism Discovered as an anti-Semitic tome, yet when you look into that book, who it was written by and what it's about, you find it was written by a professional reporter and author. It quotes heavily from the Talmud. It's received glowing reviews from the likes of university professors, Christian bishops, and others. The vast majority of the reviews on Amazon are positive. In other words, anything which highlights the supposed unsavory aspects of Talmudic Judaism is anti-Semitic. And think about that next time you hear someone accuse somebody else of being anti-Semitic. And finally, notice that the so-called victim claims that O'Connell's criticisms of Judaism are exactly what happened in Poland. The same theories, the same comments. In other words, if you criticize Judaism, you obviously want to exterminate the Jews. Now, no sane person with a functioning brain could fail to see how absurd that notion is, or what this strategy is designed to do. But the reality is that right now there's a man who spent 3 years behind bars in an Australian prison for expressing views not dissimilar to what I've just read out. Now, with that little background, Lindsay, I know you've been following O'Connell for a lot longer than I have. What can you add to what I just read out?
There was one of the things that struck me about him was that when he was in prison, he was ganged up on and attacked by other prisoners. Now, I don't know the background to that, but he had his arm broken. And the prison authorities allowed him to stay in prison with a broken arm for a month before he received medical attention. Now, that seems like they're sorting him out. Now, the other point was that prior to his trial, there was a massive demonstration, and there were Australian politicians of various brands there. There were people like the Israeli ambassador who had this, and it received huge amounts of publicity in Perth because that's where it was held. This was like a week before his trial. Now, if you and I did something like that, it would be suggested that we were trying to pervert the course of justice. But this had no effect whatsoever. Now, as far as the actual trial, I can't be sure of a lot of it. I haven't had time to read the transcripts. They're very large files. The one thing that did come across to me was that he was making a High Court application at one stage, and when you read that, the amount of information and infiltration of Australian security services and our armed forces that either Israeli citizens have had, or people from Australia who've gone and joined the Israeli armed services and then returned as experts and then infiltrated our security and our defence forces is quite alarming. What it means is that we really have lost control of our own secret service or our own defence force, and he makes it. You'd have to read the articles, and we'll put links to them. But it was like to do with the submarine that the Australians just board. There were Israeli intelligence information going into that. Now, when we talk about back doors when we come to do it, all of these things have got back doors, and so we really are we open to the Israeli Defence Force then, knowing everything about us and what we're doing? I won't go on and on about it. I'm just very concerned. It's almost as if he was being ganged up on because he had other knowledge, and he was actually upsetting people, not upsetting a teenager or a young man in walking down the street in Perth, but that he was actually upsetting other people because somebody somewhere knew what was happening in the security service and knew what was happening in the Defence Force and weren't looking after Australia's interests. And here is Brendan pointing this out to them, and of course they wouldn't like this very much. I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Sorry, Matt, I probably could have made it a little bit more clear. Basically, what happened with O'Connell was he went to a protest against the sale of Israeli oranges at a supermarket. So, you know, the same way that some people boycott this country or that country's goods, he wanted to get people to boycott these Israeli oranges because he feels that the Israelis are slaughtering Palestinians, what have you. So that's what he went there for. Two Jewish gentlemen came up and took a photo of him and walked away. So he followed them and asked them who were they. He found out that they were Jewish. He said, well, do you want to explain that they were pro-Israeli Jewish people? So we said, do you want to explain Israel's actions in Gaza and what have you? And they engaged him in the conversation. A shopper, and you can see all of this on the video footage for yourself. And again, I encourage your listeners to go and check this out. a shop owner asked them to leave because they're making a scene, in the middle of a walkway. So they walk outside. O'Connell's not chasing these people. They're standing there debating with him. It does get heated, does get loud. There's no violence or threats of violence, but both the O'Connell and the two Jewish people, or one Jewish person in particular, yelling at each other their own views about the whole Middle East conflict. And then O'Connell says, well, I think that Talmudic Jewish people are racist and mass killers and what have you. That's what he said. And it was because of those things that he said and the fact he posted to his blog that he did 3 years in an Australian jail. And I guess I have to make this context clear. If that isn't a quashing of freedom of expression, then I would like to know what is. That a person in this day and age could do 3 years in prison for saying that he thinks a religion is full of murderers or what have you. I mean, it's a criticism of a religion, and yet that got him 3 years in prison, which could have been, I mean, the fascinating thing is he got done for 6 charges, and he could have served 11 years if he was asked to serve the sentencing consecutively, but instead they made it concurrent, so he did 3 years. But he could have done as many as 11 years in an Australian prison for saying to a Jewish person who came and took his photo, a pro-Israeli Jewish person who came and took his photo at a protest, do you want to explain the actions of Israel? And then getting into a debate where he said, well, I think Talmudic Jews are this, that, and the other. That's enough for 3 years in prison. And I want to throw this one over to Jeff and to Ethan. Just based on what I've read out to you about the story here, what are your thoughts on what has happened to O'Connell, or just generally the notion that you can spend years in jail for what O'Connell's alleged to have done?
I am absolutely horrified. I cannot believe that we are at this state. And this is just but one example. You had a French comedian who had very similar, has been arrested and has been threatened with 7 years for making anti-Jewish remarks, anti-Semitic remarks. So, yeah, it is the scariest thing in the world when you see history repeating itself. And all I can say is that, I fear for our own safety, because I don't even know what I could get in trouble for now, because I come out and I have many times on my show criticized the state of Israel, criticized the actions of Israel against the Palestinian state, against the Palestinian people. And I feel like, why on earth should I not be able to do that? I mean, they do that every day on the corporate media. They go out and they rip apart North Korea or Muslim countries or whatever, Iran all the time. They can say whatever they want, but we can't say anything against the state of Israel. If we come out and we speak our mind, and this is just the case too, they're taking people that are known figures and making an example out of them. And this is what makes it even scarier, because they're trying to make people self-censor themselves so that they will not speak out and they will not stand up to the injustices that are happening. So it's terrifying to see this type of action happening in a place like Australia.
Yeah, you make some fantastic points. And I've also noticed it too. More and more you see YouTubers, bloggers, journalists, anyone that's coming out to question the state of Israel, especially lately, have had their channels taken down or being censored, yet the media will drive a campaign of fear-mongering, sensationalist propaganda against Muslims centered around religion, the Islamic religion, and say that all Muslims are extremists, that it's an Islamic extremist state. But yet, any time we want to access our fundamental rights that we should have, if it's in regard to Israel more prevalently than others, we are in trouble. And that doesn't just stem to our YouTube, to our online. That can also stem into our life too, in employment and into other things too, because as Lindsay did mention, there's a lot of infiltration in security intelligence organizations. There's a lot of infiltration within government, and we all know that. There's powers that are higher that make this very difficult thing to do, and it shouldn't be like that, should it?
No, and up until the New Year's Eve We'll Do It Live bash, I had my suspicions over Jeff, but no, that's only a joke. Hey, for listeners who aren't familiar, the We'll Do It Live crew did a New Year's Eve bash. It was a 5-hour show, a lot of fun. A few people got a few beers into them and started criticizing countries they don't normally criticize, and it was a whole lot of fun. Go and check it out. But going back to what you were saying earlier about the hypocrisy there, Mr. Gore in the live chat, which has over 100 live listeners right now, Mr. Gore in the live chat pointed out the fact that here in Australia, almost every day our newspapers are describing IS as a death cult. Almost every day, that's on the front pages. And yet, O'Connell has supposedly committed some kind of racism or anti-Semitism by describing Judaism as a death cult. Now, if that's not hypocrisy, nothing is. There's no such thing as hypocrisy if those two things don't go well together.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was trying to point out, the hypocrisy there. It's just unbelievable, and that's a perfect example, especially during the Sydney siege. The actual words "death cults" were on the front page of the newspaper, and it didn't even have anything to do with ISIS at all. It wasn't an ISIS flag. It's just unbelievable, and it's scary because it's getting worse and worse, and the internet's the only thing we have left, and we need to utilize the free speech that we do have while we still have it. I mean, where is the jail time for journalists that want to report false information about the Muslim religion? Where's the jail time for them? You want to tell me that that's any different? It's just unbelievable.
It is, and we've got more people to discuss today, Lindsay. There were 3 people I wanted to focus on today. Before we move on from O'Connell, do you have any more thoughts on his story, or shall I move on to the next one?
No, I think you can probably move on to the next one.
Excellent. Just before I do, I just want to reiterate something that I did mention earlier. In that article that I read out, O'Connell said that these criticisms of Judaism are, and again I'll quote him directly, exactly what happened in Poland. The same theories, the same comments, end quote. And I just want the listeners to let that sink in. This character is claiming, the so-called victim of O'Connell is claiming that anyone who would describe Judaism in negative terms, the same sort of negative terms that Islam is always described in, those people are engaging in exactly what happened prior to the atrocities of World War II. That's the conflation that they're making. And when I read that in this article, even I, and I'm someone who reads into this a lot, even I was surprised just how far they're willing to go with this rhetoric to compare anyone who criticizes Judaism to someone who wants to exterminate Jews. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But that's the world we're living in. Now, I want to move on to the second of the 3 people I wanted to focus on today, and that's a character named Fredrick Toben. Now, a lot of our Australian listeners will be familiar with this character, a lot of our international ones won't. So again, I'll just ask for your patience while I read out this article. This is from the Sydney Morning Herald, our Sydney-based Fairfax. It used to be a broadsheet, now it's just a tabloid. The article is entitled, "Holocaust Denier Fredrick Toben Backs George Brander's Plans for Discrimination Law." This is from the 13th of May 2013. Quote, "Holocaust denier Fredrick Toben has strongly backed the Abbott government's plans to water down race hate laws, describing them as a welcome challenge to Jewish supremacism in Australia. In an explosive submission to Attorney General George Brander's review of the Racial Discrimination Act, obtained by Fairfax Media, Mr. Toben congratulated the government for its attempts to rectify what he describes as a flawed law which only benefits Jewish Zionist Israeli interests. His comments drew immediate anger in the Jewish community, which has warned that the government's plans for Section 18C of the Act will open the door to vilification on a massive scale. Mr. Toben said Senator Brandes, who famously defended people's rights to be a bigot, had incorrectly claimed the need for reform of the Racial Discrimination Act was about free speech and the conviction of News Corp columnist Andrew Bolt under 18C. The essence of what the RDA Section 18C is all about and why it needs to be repealed is that the so-called Bolt law is in effect a Holocaust protection law," Mr. Toben wrote. Mr. Toben, a German-born Australian, was found to be in breach of discrimination laws in 2003. He went to jail in 2009 for defying federal court orders to remove material from his website that claimed there was no gas chambers at Auschwitz and describing the murder of millions of Jews during World War II as the Holocaust myth. Executive Council of Australian Jury Executive Director Peter Wertheim said, "I am sure the government will derive no joy at all from Fredrick Toben's endorsement of its proposals to water down Section 18C and 18D of the Racial Discrimination Act. Toben has spent a large part of his life vainly attempting to rehabilitate the disgraced record of Nazi Germany. If the government's proposed changes to the law are enacted, racist rants of this kind will be given a free pass on the basis that they are part of a public discussion. Worse still, overtly racist discourse will be given the accolade of freedom of expression. It's time for the government to abandon its ideologically driven attempt to emasculate laws that have worked well for nearly 20 years, end quote. And I should have given more background there. There was a debate last year about changing the anti-discrimination laws in this country because a conservative columnist for Uncle Rupert Murdoch's News Corp had criticised white Indigenous Australians, and he was prosecuted for it. So then the conservative media wanted to get rid of this anti-discrimination law from the books. But of course, if they do that, then that opens up Jews and other people to criticism as well, which is why those laws haven't been changed. Now, the key points to take from that article I just read out are that Toben went to prison in Australia for stating his belief online that there were no gas chambers at Auschwitz and that the Holocaust, as it's taught today, is a myth. He spent 3 months in prison for stating his views. 3 months prison. I have seen apologists for this nonsense claim that Toben wasn't jailed for his views, but for breaching a court order. But the court order was to not express his views. So whereas with O'Connell, you can, if you're willing to lie, claim that he abused people in real life and chased them down the street, even though there's no video footage for it, with Toben, they're not even claiming that he offended any particular person. They're claiming that by putting the material online, he'd done something wrong. So he spent time in prison for stating his views on a website. So this is a whole nother level, again, worse than what happened with O'Connell. And the second point I want to make about this article is that Jewish organizations openly state that it's racist to believe that the current official story of the Holocaust is fabricated or exaggerated or in any way embellished. So think about that. It's racist to have different opinions about history when the historical events in question regard the Jewish Holocaust. Now, with that background, Lindsay, I want to throw to you again. What are your thoughts on all of this?
There are a number of things. Just the last part you mentioned was that the moment you try to prove that there wasn't a Holocaust, then you're liable to go to jail if you go to Germany. Or as in Toben's case, he went to London and the Germans then issued an arrest warrant for him in London. Luckily, the London courts had some sense and dismissed it. The other point was that as a German, it appears that he can't be insulted, because to suggest that the Germans mechanically murdered 6 million people, if I was a German, I'd take that as an insult. But apparently that can't be an insult. It can only be an insult if it goes in the other direction. Now that I can't understand. And that's one of the things that gets up my nose a little bit, because it was another example exactly is what you were just saying before about if you raise anything to do with anti-Semitism now, it's a rehearsal for another Holocaust, just like it was in Poland prior to the Second World War. But at the same time, we should be saying, well, what you're doing in suppressing our opinions is no different to Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago description of what happened in Soviet Russia, where anybody said anything against the Jews and you could be killed. So both these things have got two sides to them. They are very worried that they're going to be massacred. We're worried that we're going to lose all our freedoms and we're going to finish up in camps. I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I'll throw it over to our international friend out there. Jeff, based on the article that I just read out, I'm sure you aren't familiar with Toben's story specifically, but as a general kind of conversation, what do you think about this idea that for posting to an internet site that you disbelieve certain aspects of the official story of the Holocaust, you can spend 3 months in prison? In Australia, not even in Austria, one of those countries that are completely controlled, in a place like Australia that thinks it's free. What do you think about this idea of people spending 3 months in prison for uploading their thoughts to the website?
I think it's a horror show. I think it's nothing but history repeating itself. It's total logical fallacies to the core. One group, one religion, one group of people has a special term for them that applies only to them. No one else in the world, no other group in the world has that type of power, that type of protection. Only one group. To this day, I cannot understand the term. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. It means that a certain group of people, a certain religion has more power than every other group of people out there, everybody else. That if you criticize them, that you automatically fall under, huge scrutiny, potentially being jailed, maybe even killed. It's so disturbing. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, there's so many sub-stories to this. There's so much going on in our governments, and what's happening in Australia is very much what's happening in Canada. They use the term Holocaust denier, anti-Semite. They throw these terms around. They completely slander, bespoil people's reputations, run them through the mud, tar and feather people for questioning things. what kind of society do we live in where we can't question the past, where we can't take a different interpretation, where we can't re-examine things that have happened? Well, that type of society is a society of mind control. It's a society of fascism. It's a society that I want no part of. And I am out, this one of the most terrifying things that's happening in the world right now is this. I can't believe this kind of stuff. I mean, I'd much rather live in a world or in a city or a country where neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan can get together and, dress up in their costumes and march down the street than live in a country where I can't speak my mind.
You made some fantastic points. For those who don't know, expanding on that, Tony Abbott, our current Prime Minister, is well known as a pro-Zionism protester when he was younger here in Australia. And it seems that, as I said, once again, at the highest levels, once again, that ideology is festering down through all aspects of society, and it's only gotten stronger after this Paris event, where anti-Semitism and all of these words that have been subconsciously programmed to people, just like the term conspiracy theorist, it seems like it's only getting stronger from here on out.
Well, a lot of our listeners wouldn't be aware of this, but it's the case now that at Australian universities, if you're a member of one of the young Labor or young Liberal parties, that they have junkets to Israel that are largely funded by the Israeli government or other interests, so that say you're a young Liberal or young Labor, there are two major parties in Australia, you go to university, you join one of these clubs, student politics, whatever. Next thing, you're going to Israel for either nothing or close to nothing. You're having a 1 week, 2 week junket. They're showing you around, making you feel good. And what are you going to do? Well, you're probably going to come back to Australia with much nicer views of this beautiful Israeli government that's taking care of you than you would have otherwise. And of course, that's on the individual level. On the structural level, we know just how much influence the Zionist lobby, if we call it that, has on party politics at the top level. Of course, I discussed on one of Jeff's shows a couple of weeks ago the fact that our former foreign minister, former foreign minister in Australia here, Bob Carr, who was the foreign minister of our federal government, wrote a book where he said that even though he was our foreign minister, he had less access to our prime minister and had less say in our foreign policy than the Melbourne-based, he called it the Zionist lobby, but he had to watch his words. We know exactly what he was talking about. Whether you want to call it the Zionist lobby or the Jewish lobby, they have more access to the prime minister of this country and more say in our foreign policy than the foreign minister of the day, and that's on public record. So it's at all levels. It's at the top, where they influence our prime minister directly. It's at the bottom, where they pay for 18-year-olds to go to Israel on a junket. That's the control that these people have on our entire political discourse. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I'll get back to Toben again, otherwise I won't do him justice. We're going to have a link to the YouTube video of him being interviewed, and the thing I liked about him was that he actually brings down, he talks about the pillars on which the Jewish control is based. And so I like the idea that this man would sit down and methodically go through and say, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, this is what we've got to do to stop it. Now, that's why I would recommend to people that they go and have a look at the YouTube video that we're going to link, and they'll see much of this for themselves.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and even at the bottom levels, just elaborating on what you said, Johnno, before I get back to Toben, through the whole structure, obviously from the top to the bottom, and then it resonates past that into the subconscious minds of the public in general, just en masse. That is a card house that does support this, that it supports the suppression of free speech, that supports all of these notions of anti-Semitism, whatever the terminology may be. And it's been drilled into us through school for a long time about the Holocaust, about anti-Semitism, about the Jews. And it just seems that not just in Australia, but on an international level, it's only getting stronger, and that's where we really need to build a community to do it. I just wanted to emphasize on how close we are to losing our freedom of speech, especially here in Australia, once we are labelled to be the terrorists, and this is going to be a driving force behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into a broader discussion more generally about internet censorship and freedom of expression around the world, which is where Jeff is going to have so much to say. The reason I wanted to focus on these 3 Australian examples is because you look at O'Connell, okay? He was accused of harassing a person in person. Now, as Lindsay has said, you watch the video for yourself, you'll see that that's a lie. But let's just pretend for argument's sake that if you were to harass someone, somehow you deserve 3 years in jail. Okay, so you take it back a step and you look at Toben. All this guy did was upload his questions about Auschwitz onto the internet, where the only people who will see it are the people who decide to go to his site. He spends 3 months in prison, but it gets worse than that, and I won't read out the full articles because time is of the essence, but I've got 2 other articles here. I'll link to them on AusroundTable.com. He didn't just spend 3 months in prison. He was bankrupted by the case. The person who brought those contempt of court charges against him was the president of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, who went by the name of Jeremy Jones. So basically, Toben was asked to front up $180,000 for court costs, didn't have the money, so he was bankrupted. In Australia, when you're bankrupted, they take away your passport. So for daring to put on his website that he questions the gas chambers at Auschwitz story, he was put in prison for 3 months, he was bankrupted, and he can no longer leave the country. Do you see what I'm saying here? And that was for uploading something to the internet. Now, Lindsay, we do have to get onto the third of the 3 people I want to discuss today. Before I do you have any more final comments on Toben?
No. The only thing I would point out is that the point you just made now about Toben has happened to others as well. I won't go into detail, but you've got Olga Scully, Andrew Fraser. There have been a number of people who've been bankrupted or partially destroyed because of court action. Now, obviously one group is working as a group and we are being picked off as individuals. So this is not an isolated thing with Toben only. It's happening to quite a number of people.
Yeah, and if I can expand on that one for you, Lindsay, this is from the ABC, Written Apology over Holocaust Denial, April 28, 2009. I'll just read out a quick bit of this. Quote, a man who breached federal court orders to remove website material which denied the Holocaust has issued a written apology. Fredrick Toben, 65, was found guilty of 24 charges of contempt for breaching orders not to publish material vilifying Jewish people on his Adelaide Institute website. The judge said Toben did not seem to understand that the case was not scrutinizing his beliefs or determining whether the Holocaust happened, end quote. So you think about this. These kangaroo courts, even by their own admission, are not about scrutinizing beliefs or determining whether or not the Holocaust happened. So what could they possibly be about? Well, only one thing. Stopping Toben and any other Australians like him from expressing their skepticism about the official narrative of the Holocaust. Now, why might they want to do that? You know, that's where I go with this. If they want you to not question it, why is that? In my experience in life, every time someone doesn't want you to look further, there's a reason for it. Now, we do have to move on to the third of the 3 people I wanted to talk about today, and that's a guy named Mike Carlton. And again, to our international listeners who are looking forward to hearing more from Jeff, trust me, we all are. We'll get to a big Jeff monologue soon enough in the show, but I wanted to spend a bit of time today talking about these 3 particular cases because together they paint a picture of exactly what's happening in this country, Australia, today. And like Jeff C always says, it's the 6 eyes. We're all in this together. So if in Australia we're going through this right now and it's not that this bad in your country yet, well, the plan is that it will be this bad in your country. So this is relevant to every single person listening to this podcast right now. Now, I'll talk about Mike Carlton. It's important to understand that the censorship of views about Jewish people under Israel is not confined to so-called Holocaust deniers, okay? Far from it. Last year, a respected columnist for Fairfax, which is our second of 2, we've only really got 2 print companies in this country, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp and Fairfax. Fairfax has about 20 or 25% of the printed newspapers in Australia every day. So this guy was a writer for Fairfax. He lost his job last year following an article he penned about the atrocities being committed by Israel against Gazans during the July-August Operation Protective Edge. This was the operation wherein, even by the Israeli Defense Force's own figures, more than 1,500 Gazan civilians were slaughtered, along with over 500 so-called militants. On the other hand, 66 IDF members died and just 5 Israeli civilians. So let's do the numbers here. 1,500 Gazan civilians dead, 5 Israeli civilians dead. That's 300 to 1. 500 Gazan so-called militants, 66 IDF members. That's 7 to 1. Those are the figures even by the IDF. Now, Carlton wrote an article about this, basically saying that what Israel was doing was wrong. It was a slaughter. He received hundreds of emails, many of them highly abusive, and he responded to 7 or 8 of them in kind, they abused him, so he abused them back. Those people complained. He was forced to resign for those inappropriate emails. That's the official story anyhow. Now, it gets worse. There was a cartoon that accompanied that article in both the print and online versions. And this was also demonized as being anti-Semitic. Now, while I'm talking, I'll see if Ethan can get up a live screen share for our live listeners right now of the cartoon in question. And anyway, so this all happened in August. Now, soon after that article went to print, Fairfax apologized for publishing the cartoon. And just a couple of days ago, so what's this, 5 months later, the Australian Press Council released their adjudication on complaints about the cartoon. Now, again, for international listeners, Melbourne's our second largest city. It has 2 newspapers. The Age is the second biggest one. In Sydney, there's 2 newspapers. Sydney Morning Herald is the second biggest one. So this was an article that was published in essentially one of our 2 newspapers you can access in Melbourne or Sydney. Now, I think that Ethan's got the screen share up right now, has he? I'll just keep on talking here. The Australian Press Council, this is how they describe themselves on their website. Quote, the Australian Press Council was established in 1976 and is responsible for promoting good standards of media practice, community access to information of public interest, and freedom of expression through the media. The Council is a principal body with responsibility for responding to complaints about Australian newspapers, magazines, and associated digital outlets, end quote. So that's the Press Council's own description of themselves. Now, have we got that screen share up at the moment for our live listeners?
Yeah.
Let me just check the...
Yeah, it's here.
Can I just...
We do.
Yeah, we do? Excellent. All right, sweet. So you guys can see that cartoon. That was the cartoon that was published. Here is the Press Council adjudication from January 17, 2015. Quote, the Press Council has considered whether its standards of practice were breached by a cartoon in the Sydney Morning Herald on July 26, 2014. It was associated with an opinion piece on the conflict in Gaza. The Council asked the publication to comment on whether the cartoon placed gratuitous emphasis on race or religion. It also asked the publication whether the cartoon could reasonably have been expected to cause offence and showed insufficient concern for balancing the sensibilities of some readers with the broader public interest. The publication pointed out that the newspaper's editor-in-chief and news director had subsequently participated in seminars facilitated by the Jewish Board of Deputies to raise awareness about imagery that could be construed as anti-Semitic. It further said that seminars were planned and would be expanded to include the newspaper's senior editorial staff. The publication also said that a requirement for extra layers of approval had subsequently been introduced for all cartoons prior to publication. And here was the conclusion, quote, in this instance, the cartoon's linkage between the Jewish faith and the Israeli rocket attacks on Gaza was reasonably likely to cause great offence to many readers. A linkage with the Israeli nationality might have been justifiable in the public interest, despite being likely to cause offence. But the same cannot be said of the implied linkage with the Jewish faith that arose from inclusion of the kippah and the Star of David. Accordingly, the Council's standards of practice were breached on the ground of causing greater offence to readers' sensibilities than was justifiable in the public interest, end quote. Now, all our live listeners can see that cartoon for themselves. You can see that it does indeed have a Star of David on the chair. The gentleman sitting in the chair is wearing a kippah, that is true, and it looks as though he's overlooking Gaza. Now, I'll get Ethan to scroll down for me for people to see what that cartoon was based on. And there you can see it. That photo that you can see now, live listeners, was from a couple of weeks prior and is literally of Jewish Israeli people overlooking Gazan cities as they're being bombed. Now, a lot of our listeners are listening over an audio podcast and can't see the photo for themselves. I would encourage you to go and check out our website, AusRoundtable.com. We will provide links for you to compare the photos. But Ethan, just before I go on with this really quickly, you would agree that that cartoon is almost an identical replica of the actual photo.
Absolutely, definitely.
It has a Star of David. Granted, that's on the Israeli flag, but they're the same Star of David. That's not a coincidence. And there are people in that photo wearing kippahs. Yep. So the cartoon was just a cartoon representation of a photo of something that actually happened. Now, let's go back to the Australian Press Council and what they claim to be about. The Australian Press Council was established in 1976 and is responsible for promoting good standards of media practice, community access to information of public interest, and freedom of expression through the media, end quote. And yet this same body has said that that cartoon, based on an actual photo of things that really happened, is impermissible because it depicts the Star of David and a kippah, even though the photo clearly shows the Star of David and a kippah. Now, that was very lengthy, and I thank again the listeners for bearing with me there. I'll throw straight to you over there, Jeff, because the listeners love your voice. What do you think about what I've just read out?
The hypocrisy is unbelievable. It is unbelievable, especially in the shadow of the whole Charlie Hebdo hoax psyop that they've carried out. You have world leaders like David Cameron getting up saying that they are attacking our freedoms. And yet, you have a satirical magazine in France that, constantly was making fun of Muslims, making fun of their faith, mocking their prophet, Muhammad, mocking their religion. And yet that's perfectly acceptable. In fact, everyone is Je suis Charlie because those people were heroes. And yet you cannot even depict a real event that happened exactly as it happened, which you've so eloquently pointed out. I mean, it is just, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. My mind is just blown.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jeff, while you regather your thoughts there, I'll throw over to the Silverfox himself. Lindsay, what are your thoughts, mate?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that came to me is that the journalists are being re-educated. It almost sounds like something out of communist China after the Mao Revolution. If you don't fit the mold, we'll have to re-educate you somewhere. That's
exactly what it is. It says in the article that not just the editor, but the entire editorial staff and the entire news, the top-level news team, have had to go and essentially get re-education lectures. It says it there in black and white.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's what struck me about it. So you can bet your life that next time something like this comes up, they're going to be really open about it then, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable. And I remember when this happened, and I remember seeing the commotion on Twitter and the commotion that was happening at the time, and I thought, this is pretty, revolutionary in terms of the controlled corporate media here in Australia, that you never see any of this, or if you do, it's suppressed. And I think Jeff put out a good point there about the hypocrisy at the moment with the fact that Charlie Hebdo, everyone has come out in support of that magazine, yet when it's flipped to include Israel and the systematic genocide on Gaza, all of a sudden a whole restructure of a news corporation has to be taken out by the controllers, which obviously would have something to do with it, I imagine.
And of course, with censorship, there are different ways to censor people and to restrict freedom of speech. The obvious and overt ones are to imprison people, to fine them, what have you. Then there are other forms of censorship as well, such as trying to get people fired for writing articles you don't like, or for publishing cartoons you don't like, get them embarrassed and have them take out these re-education camps or what have you. There are different ways to censor people, and clearly we're seeing many of those things taking place simultaneously. And I guess the reason why I wanted to focus on these three people in particular, let's go through them. O'Connell, okay, let's pretend for argument's sake that he did follow someone down the street and abuse them. I still wouldn't say that that means he should spend 3 years behind bars, but you can see why some people might say, well, you shouldn't abuse people, he did the wrong thing. Okay, let's take it back a step. Let's look at Fredrick Toben. He was abusing nobody. He just posted to his website that he doubts Auschwitz gas chambers. That specifically is what got him in trouble. So people don't have to access his website, but that was still enough to get him 3 months behind bars. He's bankrupted and his passport's been cancelled, okay? But some people will say, well, he shouldn't have uploaded it to the net. It might offend some people, right? He's denying the Holocaust, and that's a very bad thing to do. TV says it's a bad thing to do that. All right, let's take it back a step. Mike Carlton is a respected journalist. He's been in the industry for decades. He writes an article, and because he responds to people who abused him, and some of the abuse that he copped was incredible, because he responded to him, his job's gone. Fairfax apologises for publishing the article and the cartoon, and then the Australian Press Council just in the last few days comes out and says, yeah, that cartoon's not admissible because it depicts the Star of David and the Kipper, even though it is based on a photo that depicts the Star of David and the Kipper. So you see, this censorship, it isn't just a legal censorship, it isn't just a social censorship, this is a full court press, to use Jeff's terminology. This is what you get yourself into if you dare to criticise Israel, the Zionist lobby, Judaism, call it whatever you want, describe it how you want to describe it. The moment you start doing what we're doing right now, you're asking for trouble, Ethan.
Yeah, you put it in fantastic perspective there with those examples, and it just seems that on all levels, no one's safe, even within the mainstream press. I think it would have had to have gone through a number of stages to get approved, and I do believe that there would have been some editorial process where he had to justify to the editor, no, it's based on a real image, before the editor approved it. But then my perception on it is that forces above the editor then came down on him, because if the editor approved it, the editor was fine with it. And if they want to use the whole response on Twitter and the response to the abuse as the justification for him losing his job, which is clearly not the truth at all, you can see that there are forces that we don't know of higher within the Australian media and higher than that. And once again, it's just tumbling down through all aspects of society, and it's only portioned to that one section.
Yeah, and again, as I said, this censorship is multifaceted, and shortly we're going to get on to giving Jeff some time to describe the kind of censorship that he's been subjected to when we get into the broader discussion. But before we do that, Lindsay, I know you've prepared a small piece regarding something that you saw in the Courier Mail and your response to it. So I want to give you a couple of minutes now to read that bit out, and then we're going to get into the next segment, which will be the general discussion. But like I said, before we do, Lindsay, do you want to just read out what you've prepared for us?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, this was an article on the 11th of January this year by a journalist called Carolyn Marcus, and she wrote an article on this very topic of free speech and taking offence. And she admitted to being a Jew and taking offence to that cartoon that you've just displayed. I've personally been offended, and this is quoting her, I've personally been offended by cartoons I believe went too far. In particular, one that ran in the Sydney Morning Herald in July last year, featuring a man with a large hook nose. Now, you didn't mention that. You mentioned all the other things, but you didn't mention the large hook nose. Wearing a Jewish skull cap while casually reclining on his Star of David emblazoned armchair and blowing up Gaza with his TV remote. End of quote. Now, it goes on, and she starts getting into references to Nazi Germany propaganda cartoons and anti-Semitism, and she goes on and on. I'll probably send her a letter later on, but I haven't had time to research it and do anything about it yet. But the point you made was there are YouTube videos of this very same thing, almost identical to the cartoon. And I'd just like to read something by her fellow Jew called Paul Eisen. Now, he's got a blog spot, and we'll give you the address for it. I've got a lot of time for the man. And he says, quote, "My fellow Jews, Israelis and others, look at what's happening in Gaza. Then look at what's happening in Paris, and then look at your dreadful behavior and reflect on that age-old Jewish trait, that ethnic flaw, if you like, by which we Jews always go too far. Always, we fail to look into the eyes of the other to see that they've had enough. Always, we never see till it's too late. More importantly, all you plain, ordinary, perfectly decent Jews and Israelis, look to your leaders and activists, those big shots who care nothing for anyone, Jew or Gentile, but who are so endangering our well-being." Now, for any Jew listening, and then he's got in brackets some chance, I've even dreamed up a starter to-do kit list. Press publicly and immediately for the repeal of all Holocaust denial and all thought crime laws. Full and free historical inquiry into the Holocaust and all World War II history, and the cessation of all reparation payments to Holocaust survivors. The second point was press publicly and immediately for Israel to acknowledge the crimes of 1948, agree to the principle of the Palestinian right of return, and begin meaningful talks with everyone and anyone on how to immediately improve the terrible situation in Israel, quote, / Palestine. And the final point is publicly distinguish between anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. And then in brackets he says, you can change the words if you want, end of bracket. The one being a legitimate opposition to an abusive Jewish power. The other being a blind hatred of all Jews simply because they are Jews. Accept one and reject the other. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that that's a very wise article, because in the past, there's been a whole history of a couple of thousand years of people having enough of the Jewish power and then rising up and having pogroms and things like that. I think he's very wise, and I think he's probably justified in what he says about being in fear. At the same time,
go on.
yeah, I won't be a minute. At the same time, this woman, he's trying to get to the likes of this woman, but I think he's right in that you'll never get to her. She's going to find offence. It's something that is so obviously the cartoon is taken from the video. There's nothing to take offence at there at all. She's so easily taking offence, you're not going to get through to her. So I don't know whether there is any helping these people. Okay, I'll throw back to you.
No, I definitely agree. And I always revert back to the notion of the hypocrisy behind it. The hypocrisy of anyone, especially the first author that you mentioned there with the article criticizing the cartoon and whatnot. I always refer back to a speech by Norman Finkelstein at the University of Waterloo. Now, you can say what you want about Finkelstein, but he sums it up perfectly with the crocodile tears of everyone that tries to refer back to anti-Semitism, that tries to refer back to the Holocaust and try to paint Jewish people in a certain way, and that any criticism of Jews is expressing the notion of supporting the extermination of the Jews. If they had any love for humanity, if they had any real connection to it, they would be crying for the Palestinians at the moment, because the Palestinians are going through systematic genocide, just as everyone did during World War II, when millions of people were slaughtered and when the world was torn into the brink of death and destruction, as it has been all through history. So the second article read there was fantastic to distinguish the difference between it. I completely agree that you shouldn't just hate all Jews because they're Jews. You should hate all power. You should hate all authority that tries to take away from free humanity. That's the question here. But it just seems that the Zionist lobby are the ones that are controlling that at the moment, and that's the power behind it.
Can I just interject really quickly? I apologise to the people in the live chat right now. It seems that Jeff's presence has attracted a few trolls, and I've only just picked up on it, so I'm going to spend the next few minutes trying to delete those trolls. And I mean, really, this is another aspect of it, isn't it? You've got the overt censorship, you've got the subversive censorship, and then you've got stuff like this where they're not even trying to censor us, they're just trying to cause us grief while we're discussing things in an open manner. That's the society we live in today, so I do apologise to the live listeners. We'll sort out those trolls very quickly. While I'm doing that, Jeff, I want to throw straight to you right now, mate. Give me some time here with these trolls. What are your thoughts on everything that's been discussed, from the Australian perspective, before we move on to the broader perspective?
Yeah, I think it's important for everyone to realize that the Jewish people themselves are being psyoped by and large, and this is, I mean, they're being programmed like we are, and in many ways, like, they're using this anti-Semitism as a shield, right? Instead of using pure logic, instead of examining every event from a completely unbiased sort of perspective, they automatically throw up the anti-Semite shield. And it's a really bad sort of tactic for them to be using. One of the things that I noticed too, and somebody had posted this on Hoax Online, or Hoax Central, sorry, where there was a conference in Israel about Wikipedia. And it was really quite disturbing because they had all these people, hundreds of people that were taking part in this conference to learn how to spread Zionism on Wikipedia. And people were being interviewed saying, well, we're always under attack, so we have to be proactive. We have to go onto Wikipedia, and since Wikipedia is the largest, is the number one sort of research or number one area for people to get their information from, we have to be, ever more sort of present on it and making sure that the Zionist perspective is, taking the forefront, is constantly being pushed. So, the way I see people, I mean, I see people, everyone is the same. It doesn't matter to me. There are a-holes on every block, sort of thing, everywhere in the world. So, I don't believe in racism whatsoever, one bit. So I have a really hard time with this term anti-Semitism. I've never been able to wrap my head around it. It just really bothers me, and I think it does Jews a big disservice to hide behind that shield, to constantly run to that and use that every time that they're under attack. I think that logic should prevail. I think that people should look at every incident that happens and examine it on a case-by-case basis. And, you know, like as you guys had shown with that article there with the cartoon, you know, the hypocrisy when you think about the whole Charlie Hebdo and all the psyop and all the rhetoric from the world leaders. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable that they can come around and you know, ban something like that or reprimand somebody who's done something like that, and at the same time say we're all for freedom, we're all for, you know, expression, and that's what Je suis Charlie is all about. It's clearly that the deck has been stacked in a way that's not fair. And, you know, it's nothing against Jews. Of course, Jews are awesome people like everyone else. It's that the people that are running that country are playing everyone. They are really using their powers to, you know, influence and intimidate people around the world from being able to question things like the Holocaust, for instance. And I think everything should be open to question. As someone who, I like to define myself not as a conspiracy theorist, but as an event skeptic, right? As somebody who's had tremendous experience in just breaking down recent events, I like to think that we may have been fooled on so many events. So why not just clear the slate and start afresh and examine everything with the evidence that we truly do have, and take a very empirical sort of approach to it and examine exactly what happened instead of falling into the rhetoric, falling into the fear-based trauma, you know, the censorship, all these different things. And I think by and large that the Zionists within the Jewish, within Israel are doing their country a big disservice, because what they're going to do is just foster this sort of sentiment against the Jews once again, and this is something that nobody wants. I mean, it's not beneficial to us. It's not beneficial to the Jews. It's not beneficial to our countries. It's not beneficial to the freedom of speech. It's really anti so many things, and that's not the way that we should be in this world.
Yeah, no, you make some fantastic points there. I would like to elaborate on that a bit with seeing Netanyahu at the March for Freedom was the worst thing that I've ever seen in my life, and B, you do make a good point that I always try to express to people is that I'm not attacking Jews in general. I'm attacking the Zionist lobby that is in control of that country, and its perfect divide and conquer tactics. They are being compromised as well. They are being brainwashed just as we are in our schools, just as we are in society. They are being brainwashed to believe a certain thing, and that's the representation of that. But at the end of the day, all it does is divide us amongst each other to be able to combat the system that we do have in control of us. It's just unbelievable. I think that if we are going to continue, we really need to try and break down the fallacies behind these terminologies, such as conspiracy theorists, such as anti-Semite, that have been so subconsciously programmed into the people, because whenever you criticize it, the anti-Semite flag comes up, and I think that that's not a good thing. And I've gone a bit off track here, Johnno, but the basic point that I wanted to make was that free humanity should be together as one, and we need to recognize who the power structure is, no matter where they come from, no matter what their religion is, and we need to be able to have the freedom of speech and fight for that to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the general question about Jewish people and what relevance they have to Zionism, what relevance the Zionists have to what's happening today in Gaza, I mean, who's responsible for what have you. It's a very broad debate, and it's one that I hope that we can get into later on in the show. I want to say to the listeners who are wondering why we're a little bit different today than normal, it's one of the reasons is a technical reason. Poor Ethan is listening through headphones that are on a 1-second delay, and I don't know how he can get anything out without mumbling over his words. You're doing a good job, mate. Good on you.
I apologise. It's really hard.
And a lot of people are wondering how come, like, we normally try and have lots of jokes on this show and be jocular and be lighthearted, and I guess with today's topic, This is the most important show that you and I and Lindsay have done, not just because Jeff C is here and not just because he's brought a whole new listener base. I mean, we've got 130 people listening live. So you could say, oh, it's our biggest show in numbers, but it's more important than that. We're discussing a topic that is fundamental to everything, and not just fundamental to everything for everybody else, but for this show. I mean, when we started this show, we didn't know how long we'd get before YouTube would shut us down. We're still here on our 16th episode. We hope to stay around for as long as we can, but for all we know, this could be our last show. We've touched on some topics that you're not supposed to touch on. And so if this is our last show, I have to say I've really enjoyed getting to discuss these things with an audience who want to listen, and I hope that they've enjoyed what we discussed. That's what we're here for, to discuss these things, not to attack any single person, not to try and deride any race or any religion necessarily, just to discuss what we think is true and what kind of society do you live in where you can't do that. Which leads me to a question from the chat box from Big Story Up, and he says, hey, Johnno, why are you banning the trolls in the live chat box? And I guess he means, if you don't believe in censorship, why would you censor the trolls? Well, I think that's a false conflation to suggest that people who would put you in prison for questioning Auschwitz is the same as someone who would ban you from a live chat box when you're causing a problem. The vast majority of the 130 people in the live chat box are there to discuss this topic and similar topics. They're not there to be abused by a troll, and that's why I ban the trolls, and I'll happily ban the trolls, and I'll keep banning the trolls. I don't shy away from that. If I'm going to ban a troll, I'll be open about it. You want to troll my chat box, I'm going to ban you, and that's my right. But I'll tell you what I won't do. I won't try and get you put in prison for it. I won't try and get you bankrupted for it. I won't try and get your passport taken away from you. I won't even try and publicly humiliate you. I'm just going to take you away from my chat box, because that's what adults do. Adults mix with those they want to mix with, and they don't mix with those they don't want to mix with, and that's as far as it goes. So to the trolls that have been banned, I don't want to mix with you. That's why you're not in my chat box, but I would never seek to take away your right to express your thoughts anywhere else, just not in my chat box, and that's my right. And that's the big difference between what's happened to the people that we've discussed today and the trolls who just got banned. Now, we're about to move on to the next topic, which is the general discussion about internet censorship and what have you. But, Lindsay, you've been following this Australian censorship for so long. Before we round out this segment, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with?
No, I don't, actually. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Later on, depending on the feedback we get, we could probably go into something, some particular topics in more detail at another day. But I think today we've probably done it to death, really.
Fantastic. Well, we are blessed to have on the show with us today Jeff C, and many of his listeners are used to him, generally speaking, a lot more than he's done today. Thanks for your patience, Jeff, when we went through the domestic segment just there. But really, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the show was because you've been following the censorship online more than most, and you've been subjected to it more than most. So I'm hoping you can spend 5 or 10 minutes now giving our Australian listeners who possibly aren't as familiar with your work as the international listeners, explaining what's happened to you on YouTube simply for trying to spread the truth.
Well, it's a long story, and just to give you a little inclination to the trolls, I mean, that's what follows me around. That's what I have to deal with on a daily basis. So they go wherever I go. It's I'm like those sharks, or what do you call them? Whale sharks, those parasites that hang on the side. They just go everywhere I go. So, but yes, the amount of censorship that I have encountered, I mean, every platform that I've been on. I've never been on Facebook, so I can't really speak about Facebook, but Twitter, obviously YouTube, Google, just in general, has been enormous. And in some ways, I guess because I cover a lot of controversial stuff that is somewhat to be suspected or expected, but nonetheless, I mean, it is quite it's quite daunting to have to deal with it all the time. I mean, I've had flags against my main channel for now 2.5 years. So that means, and people that aren't familiar with YouTube when you're doing videos and stuff like that. My main channel has close to 40,000 subs, so I reach a lot more people if I'm able to do work through that main channel. I have 3 other backups. So what that means essentially, when you've got strikes, means you can't host live shows, you can't post videos more than 15 minutes. It also means that your channel is a strike or 2 from being taken down, which happens quite frequently. It's happened to my channel. I'm not sure how many times my main channel's been taken down. I would say maybe 7-8 times now since I've been on that it's been taken down. Now, sometimes it's just a suspension where they say you're suspended for 2 weeks and you won't be able to access your features and whatever. Other times your channel's been terminated. It's just outright termination, right? So yeah, it's quite frustrating, but I'm actually very used to it now, so it doesn't really affect me as much. The last time, ironically, had an Australian connection, of course, and I would not be surprised in the least if this particular podcast was hit with a strike, a community guideline strike, just because we did talk about the whole anti-Semitism thing, and that's exactly what we talked about. In fact, John, you were talking about it before. You mentioned our podcast. It wasn't actually New Year's Eve. It was the 7th of January, our podcast, which you were on, and we talked, of course, about the event that happened earlier in the day in Paris, which was the Charlie Hebdo so-called massacre. And I think we were really clear. I mean, I know that I went out of my way to say, look, I have nothing whatsoever against Jews. I think everybody's the same. It doesn't bother me. I mean, I love black people. I love Muslims. I love every type of person. I've met great people around the world of any faith, color, religion. It doesn't matter to me. Right? It's, people are people, and as I say, there are a-holes on every block. I mean, it's just the way it is. I think of the Gary Larson cartoon there from The Far Side, where the God has got the earth and he's pulling out of the oven, and he's got his jar of spices, and one of the jars jerks, right? And he's like, just to make it interesting, so he's shaking the jerks on the earth. I don't think it makes a difference where you come from or who you are or what your religion is. Just there are bad people and there are good people everywhere. So we went out of our way to say that we're not anything against Jewish people or anything like that, but yet our podcast there was taken down. It was attacked. In fact, there were threats directly on that podcast from people that were part of reporting on anti-Semitism. In fact, I went to check their links and saw that they were all part of this sort of organization that reported anti-Semitism online, and they were able to get the video pulled off of Free Radio Revolution Ultimate and get the channel slapped with a community guidelines strike, which was instantly rejected. So that means that if you can appeal, you get an appeal. They say you're allowed to appeal this, so you click appeal. When I clicked the appeal, and this has happened more than once to me, it was instantly rejected. Instantly. Wow. So it meant that they had an instant rejection sort of thing. Like they weren't even going to, allow that sort of opportunity to happen. So very frustrating, but, so I lost. Now I have on all 4 channels, I have 4 channels. Not one of them is without a strike. Not one of them can I post a video more than 15 minutes, and not one of them can I host a live show. So that's very frustrating because it cuts into the amount of people that I'm able to reach. And you work for a long time, as you know. I mean, you guys are working hard to build up an audience and putting out amazing work and all that. It takes a lot of time. I mean, if you wanted to get into video games, it'd probably take a lot less time. But when you're doing truther stuff and you're trying to report on stories that are happening and give a different interpretation, not so many people are gravitating towards that stuff as we would like right at this point in time. But it takes a long time to build up a following, and so what happens often is you get momentum, you build, you get a few thousand subs, you're feeling good, then bang, it comes. You're censored. And then all of a sudden you're not allowed to post videos on that particular channel, so you move to a backup. Then you're posting videos in your backup, and you're starting to build up subs, and you're doing well, and you're getting your audience, and then boom, the thing happens again, and you're once again censored. You're not allowed to post videos. You're not allowed to post anything over 15 minutes, whatever it is, right? Your channel's suspended. It's been terminated. And I've had all my channels terminated at different times, so it's not just the main channel. So it's a constant battle. And I understand that I do have definitely one of the most controversial channels because I question most of the main stories that come off the corporate media. I often totally take the opposite take. I often call them false flags. I try not to jump on it too quickly. I don't call a story fake just because it's fashionable or it's going to get me more views. I try to really examine it and make sure before I do that. But sometimes it's so obvious that you just right away you can see it, sort of thing. And I guess after a while of doing it and really understanding the tactics that they use, you develop a sort of intuition for it. So I've definitely got better at examining these things. But nonetheless, the censorship never stops, and it's constantly there. So yeah, it's a battle. It's ongoing, and it will not lighten up. I mean, Red Pill, who's Truth Media right now, is the same thing. He had his main channel struck. So now we've got one channel left between the two of us, which is the Truth Media Films, where we can actually host a show, and that could be taken away at any time. So what I would say to you guys is definitely get a backup up and running, because you have to expect that doing this type of work is going, and it's a catch-22 as well, because as you get more popular, you're going to get more attention. The more people that are listening to you, the more chance you're going to be censored. If you're just off in the corner, nobody's really noticing you, then chances are you're not going to be censored. But if you start getting momentum, you start getting viral videos, then bam, the hammer will come down real quick. And we've seen this over and over again. So it's often the more successful channels like my own that really get hit over and over and over again. So it's very frustrating, but it's something we have to adapt to.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and it only seems like it's getting worse from here. And I appreciate you sharing the experience with us, because we haven't encountered a YouTube violation or YouTube censorship at the moment on this channel. Could change after this episode. But you mentioned you are not too familiar with Facebook censorship, and that's something that I'm very familiar with on Facebook, with news pages, with my own page that I run, the TOTT news page, with other Facebook endeavors. When Facebook went to a public entity, corporate influencers came involved and changed a lot of things. And one of the things they changed was a system where they can manipulate the news feed, and they can use keywords and code words to not allow anti-establishment things to reach all viewers. And even Channel 9, I've gone through this on another show, have been blatantly deleting people's comments that speak out against articles and banning them from the page, because when you get banned from a page on Facebook, you can still see the page, you're just not allowed to comment on it and whatnot. So even on Facebook, now, you know, right through YouTube, which it wasn't this bad. It wasn't this bad even a couple of years ago from my early YouTube days, and seeing channels like yourself and seeing channels like, I mean, you've made a lot worse videos than with more controversial sort of topics and more controversial content involved that weren't hit earlier in the days, but now because the censorship is increased, now because the community's growing, it seems like it's getting even worse. And I just wanted to ask you, where do you see this going from here, and do you think that there's an alternative to get our information out?
Well, we always have to look for alternatives. We always have to adapt to the censorship, and that's why you know, a lot of people have been going over to Zeekly, for instance. There's other options like VidMe is something I discovered recently. So people that are listening, one of my recent videos that I did on the Charlie Hebdo shooting, I actually, instead of taking a chance and uploading it to one of my YouTube channels, I actually went and uploaded to this site called VidMe. And then I made a short video on YouTube just saying, okay, here's the video that I just made. Go there and watch it and come back here and post comments. And actually worked pretty well. I ended up getting, well, last check, I had over 4,000 hits. So if there is alternatives, now people like Jeffrey Sisk, who we've had on the show and we were able to talk with, who's the founder and owner of Zeekly, are saying that they're going to stand up for our rights, and they're going to post our videos, and they're not going to cave into these bogus copyright claims that the Lenny Posner type characters are posting. So we're trying to give those people an opportunity, but those websites are being hit heavily. In fact, I'll probably have Mr. Sisk back on the show maybe next in a couple of weeks to discuss all the attacks that have happened on Zeekly, because he is getting hit like crazy. So often the type of shills and trolls that are trying to shut me down, trying to flag my videos, are going and trying to attack that website in particular now, because of so many you know, truthers have flocked there. So yeah, we have to adapt all the time. It's just the name of the game now, and censorship is not going to go away. Is it going to get worse? Probably, yeah. It doesn't get better, It's one of these things. It's probably not going to get better. But we can learn how to adapt to it. We can learn to use different alternatives. If other people are out there trying to make money and bring in, offering the type of platform that we could use, then we'll take advantage of it. But I don't think it's going to change because we're up against what we call the New World Order, and the New World Order, if corporations like Google are part of this or being influenced heavily by it, they are going to cave in, obviously, to their business interests and censor us without without thinking twice, because the bottom line for them is much more important. We already know what Google promotes. So I can say there's good things about what YouTube. I mean, I've obviously been able to build up a pretty big audience and get a big following and reach so many different people, meet so many different people, work with so many different people. But at the same time, the censorship is incessant. It's every day. I mean, I often say it's rare that I get a day where I go to click on and enter into my page where I don't get one of those pink slips on one of my channels. They come in all the time, and sometimes it's 2 or 3 in a day, and bang, a channel or 2 is down. I've lost 2 channels on the same day, sort of thing. I mean, I've had so much censorship, but I know that I'm very controversial, so I know that being on the front lines, that type of censorship is par for the course, and it's just what we have to grin and bear when we do this type of work. So we would like to think that if people coming together, so many people working together, so many people supporting one another, that if we can start to form our own platforms eventually, I think that's the genesis of where we're going, then we'll be able to stand up to this censorship better. But for the time being, it's pretty daunting. It's all over the place, and as I said, it's not going to get better.
Well, can I say, Jeff, after today, I've got a newfound respect for Chrissy Tokyo, because obviously on your show, she's the moderator who gets rid of the trolls. And I am amazed at how many trolls have followed you to our show. I should have foreseen this, and I did. And we're going to have to find one of our listeners to be our moderator, I think, because whenever we have someone on like yourself, Jeff, this is just going to keep on happening. But on the trolls, I just want to read out a few comments from the live chat. And look, we've got 120 people listening live, which is more than double last week. And last week was our best show to date. So in the space of just over 4 months, this show has grown to be the size that it is, because so many people are out there who know what we know, or who are interested in finding out what we're interested in finding out. And so even though it is annoying to see the same troll back 4 or 5 times just in the last 20 minutes, on the other, side of the equation, you've got all of these fantastic commenters. And guys, even though I haven't been reading out your comments as much today as I usually do, don't worry, I've been reading. There's been some classics. I want to read out just a few. Popanax said, Jeff, that he heard that Zeekly was banned in France. Have you heard this?
No, I haven't heard. I've had so much trouble getting into Zeekly. I did post a couple of videos yesterday. That was the first time I was able to get through, so I'll give it 5 minutes to load on my browser. If it doesn't load, I usually close the window. So no, I didn't hear that it was banned in France, but I'm not surprised.
Well, as you know, I was on the episode of Max Resistance where Up North had Jeffrey Sisk on the show, and he struck me as a genuine, 100% on our side kind of guy. Now, maybe I am a little bit more trusting than most people, but when I heard him speak, I thought, if this guy is genuine and he's ready to cop what's coming his way for doing what he's doing, his channel could be a game changer. And it is sad for me to see that his channel, his whole website has been so overwhelmed. I haven't spoken to him since. I don't know if this is, DDoS attacks, or if it's just that he's struggling with the volume of people coming to his channel, or if there's been personal things done to him. I don't know what's going on, but it is sad to see that Zeekly, which was created, at least it was open to having people like yourself on there making videos and not getting censored. It is a shame to see that he's just come under so much attack for doing what he's doing.
Well, in a way, he's doing extremely well. So he's saying the amount of traffic has been overwhelming, and he is so happy to see so many people coming on. I think channels like mine coming over has a big part of that. I think the film We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook being censored had a big part of that. But the fact that, this is how business opportunities arise. If you're willing to take a chance that other people aren't willing to take, if you're willing to stick your neck out and provide a service you're going to get rewarded. And that's what we want for someone like Jeffrey Sisk. It's like, okay, if you're willing to stand up for us, then we're willing to, fill your pockets or help you fill your pockets, because you're doing us a service. We'll help you. You'll scratch our back, we'll scratch yours, sort of thing. And that's nice. I know he's getting attacked like crazy. I haven't personally, he sent me an email a few days ago. I wrote him back. I haven't heard back from him yet. I know he's probably overwhelmed. But, he's tapping into a market that's there and that is in desperate need of solutions. And he's offering a solution. He's sticking his neck out and trying to do it. Now, some people are saying, well, he's COINTELPRO or whatever, and he's been set up. That's a possibility. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the guy personally. But I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think as human beings, it's one of the best things that we can do to other human beings. We have to have some trust. We can't go around not trusting everyone because we don't know every little detail about them. So I would say that, this guy, some people have tried to debunk him. They found that he was arrested once or something, put up a video saying, this guy's been arrested, he must be evil, right? I mean, it's crazy, but that's what happens. What happens when you are successful, what happens when you are taking on the powers that be, when you are counteracting the official narrative of stories, when you are allowing voices of dissent to stand up. And I hate to use that term because there's a YouTube channel called Voices of Dissent that's just awful. It's a shill channel, but you know what I mean. When you're taking that chance, you're going to come under a lot of attacks and stuff like that. So he is sticking his neck out right now to offer this service. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and the support right now, and I'm hoping to get him. I think me and Red Pill will try to get him in a couple weeks on the show so he can give us an update on all that. But for the time being, I mean, we have to adapt. And YouTube has made it clear that they have no interest. I mean, YouTube you can't communicate with. I've tried my hardest to reach and call. I made videos about trying to call them. I made videos about all the letters that I've written them and the generic robotic responses that are always the same. So I mean, it's very frustrating to try to reach something like Google. So it's refreshing when you have something like Zeekly where, if you're having trouble, you can actually write to the owner and he'll write you back. So, I mean, there's positives. There's always positives out there. And I think that we're seeing a lot of the positives. I think, the community that we're building is amazing. The people that are coming on board are just phenomenal. Whether they have a lot of experience or they're brand spanking new, they have energy and they inject that energy into what we're doing. The people that are taking part in these live discussions that are in the chat room, stuff like that. Aside from the shills, of course. And I have an acute case of shillitis or trollitis, so I mean they're going to follow me wherever I go, but at least you'll get 95% of the people that will come will be good people, sort of thing. So it just goes with the territory, and as you become more popular and successful, you'll find that will follow you too. And it's just the line of the business that we're in, or I don't like to say business because I don't make money off this, the work that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what you mentioned about Zeekly and Jeff Sisk, while you were talking, Dolores Flores in the comment section said that she would happily pay for Zeekly if it meant that she had uncensored internet. And I think there are so many people out there like Dolores and like myself who would happily hand over $100 a year if we had to, which is more than I'd pay for any other subscription. I'd pay that to someone like Jeff Sisk if it meant that there was a platform where we could discuss things without being censored. And on that mass resistance episode that Jeff Sisk came on, he said that, because someone asked him, have you ever censored a video? And he said there was a video that someone uploaded that gave away someone's address or something, so we had to take that down. But beyond that, no, we don't censor anything. As long as you're not doing anything stupid, go ahead. And if we had that kind of platform, I'd happily pay for it. I'm sure that you would. There are lots of people out there who would. And I don't know if it might be worth Jeff Sisk getting in touch with people like yourself and saying, hey, maybe it's time for a fundraising drive or something like this, because there are people out there who will support it because they can see that there's no other way to get the truth out there. The only way that we're going to be able to do it is grassroots. And I want to read out another couple of comments from the chat box because we love to check out the chat box. There's some good comments in there, as you know. Opopanax says that he thinks, Jeff, that you have more views than YouTube says you do, because he refreshes your videos, he watches them, and it stays at the same count, if you like. Very briefly, do you want to explain what your views are on that?
Yeah, that's actually true because if we go back to Sandy Hook, for instance, we released a video January 5th, if I remember the date correctly, 2013, which in a few days, in 3 days, had 350,000 views, which was basically me and the boys going through the whole Sandy Hook thing. I had 8 pages of notes or whatever, and I was going through all the things that I discovered, and all the inconsistencies, the crisis actors, all this thing. And that video caught wildfire, and that was just before, that was about a week before, I think it was Turn Off the TV put out their video that ended up getting 13 million views in a week. It was absolutely astonishing. That's when all of a sudden Anderson Cooper and who else? Cenk Uygur and many of the other pundits in the media started, doing these hit pieces on Sandy Hook truthers. So they obviously were worried about what we were doing. So what happened then was that video was frozen. The views, which were almost at near 400,000, were scaled back to about 315,000. And then for about a month and a half, I would say a good 40 days, that the view counter on that particular video didn't increase once, not one extra view. It got to the point that even the naysayers that were coming on and commenting on the video were saying, my word, that it's really bizarre. You're right. They aren't, increasing the view. So I even made a video about it, which people could probably search on my channel to find it. So it's nothing new that they have been playing with my views. They've done it many times. And I don't really worry about it. I mean, for instance, I tell people I have 10 million views or whatever. That's what I said when my channel went down. I actually have way more than that. It's just that a lot of my big videos have been taken down or censored or whatever, So it's I don't really worry about the views. It's not something that bothers me. I just know that there's a lot of people watching, and I just hope that there's more on on a consistent sort of basis, so that it gives me the energy to keep doing the work that I do. Obviously, you don't want diminishing returns when you're doing this type of work, because I don't get paid for it. So, getting the views, the thumbs up, the comments, it means the world to me. So I think it's just the name of the game, and who knows how they stack the views. In fact, people have done breakdowns on who is the Psy, Psy, of course, ironic name, the most popular YouTube video of all time, which is the Korean rapper guy, and saying how that those the billions of views that he's got have been completely doctored, and that has been set up by YouTube so that people automatically click on that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of truth to that too, but I don't waste my time on those little conspiracies, because that's small to me compared to like the psyops like Charlie Hebdo, right? And
yeah,
such.
absolutely. And Jeff, it wasn't just Popanax who said that he thinks that your view counts decreased. Just Think, a listener, what's his name here? Just Think About It, says he's noticed it too. And I have to say, with Red Pill, he made a video maybe 6 months ago about al-Baghdadi. And it was a satirical piece basically saying, lock up your daughters, al-Baghdadi's on the loose. And it's one of the funniest pieces of satire that I've ever seen. And I thought, this is going to go viral. I'm a fan of Red Pill, but even people who aren't fans of him, they're going to love this stuff. And last I checked, the same video was still up to like 15,000. How is that possible, other than that it's being suppressed? Now, we do have to wrap the show up soon. Lindsay has to go in a moment. Before we do get to our final thoughts, a few more viewers' comments that I want to read out. Harry Balzac says that his eyelids are getting heavy, and we do appreciate the fact that so many North American listeners have tuned in today and have stayed up late, and we really appreciate you guys sticking around with us. Obviously, after the show, we'll be doing our live Q&A like we always do. That's only for live listeners. We don't upload that with our official upload. So if you can stick around for another half an hour, the most fun actually begins in a few minutes when we wrap up the show. Mr. 79 Sav says that we need a mid-year golden sheeples. And a lot of our listeners from Australia won't be familiar with your work, Jeff, or we'll do a live show.
Well, Planetary Mirror is in the chat. So, hey, Planetary Mirror, shout out, buddy. Maybe you might want to take that up dude, because they're doing amazing work. Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, you could have a field day with the corporate media, and maybe we can see about arranging something like that where we'll do it live and present the awards for the corporate media.
Yeah, well, I want to read out my favorite comment from the chat section today was from Wolf Warrior Radio, who said, and this is when we were discussing, the early issues regarding the trolls. He said, "Throw the troll down the well." That's a good. All right, so guys, that's the live comments that I wanted to update us on. We have to wrap up the show at 2 hours, so we want to move on to our final thoughts. Lindsay, I know you have to leave. We'll take your final thoughts first. Thank you so much for your contributions today. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we wrap it up?
Yeah. Just for Jeff, I had an old pilot mate who used to say, the thicker the flak, the closer you are to the target. That was the first thing. And the second one was in Dr. Toben's video, one of the things that he stresses is that when you're attacked, don't bend the knee.
Excellent.
And that, I think, is very important. And that's probably the biggest thing we can learn from Brendan O'Connell, is he wouldn't bend the knee no matter how hard they got on him. That was it. Thanks for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to having future episodes with the Silverfox back on the show. It's going to be great.
It's good to have you back, Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us, mate. Now,
okay, thanks then. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate.
Bye-bye.
So, Jeff, we'll move on to you. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to come, and thank you for promoting the show prior to the show going to air. I mean, most of the 120 listeners that are here today, I think we can say fairly, have followed you across from your own show, so we thank you so much for doing that. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners and anyone who listens to this podcast in the future with on what we've discussed today?
Well, I'd say that thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And isn't it amazing when you find new shows like this that are so refreshing and offer so much to mull over? That's what we're all about. This community is just getting as many people involved as possible. So a big shout out to everyone, aside from the shills, of course, for turning out tonight and really giving this channel the support it deserves, because these guys are doing tremendous work, and they desperately deserve a really good audience.
We definitely appreciate that, mate. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Well, we'll move on to you now, Ethan. Again, you're sticking around for the live Q&A after the show, so I'm not going to say goodbye to you, but for the official upload, do you have any final thoughts on today's topics?
No, I think it was good. There hasn't been an episode where we've addressed some of these issues. We spoke about the Zionist lobby and everything, going into areas that we hadn't touched on before, and I think it's so good that we could have Jeff on for the most important episode, because the internet's the only thing we have left. And once again, just want to encourage everyone to make your own channels, start your own podcast, get in touch with us if you want, and we'll cross promote it, we'll listen to it. We really want to build a community, because the internet's the only thing that we have left. If the Australian Roundtable channel goes down or our videos get censored, as I said last week on the show, go to ausroundtable.com, ausroundtable.com, or tottnews.com, my website. There will be articles, there'll be links to find alternatives, and we hope to show up on iTunes and everything in the near future, because I've had a couple of emails from people saying that they takes too much bandwidth to watch it on YouTube and they'd rather MP3. It's all going to be coming, so heaps of good things coming in the future, and I'm just so happy to be a part of this community and to collaborate with people like Jeff like this.
Fantastic. Well, a couple more live comments I want to read out. Blinky Cat responding, because Jeff says that this show deserves more audience, and I appreciate that, Jeff. The truth is, I'm ecstatic with the viewers that we've got. When Ethan and I sat down to discuss this show, we had projected that within 6 months we'd be lucky to have maybe 100 or so regular listeners. So to be sitting here today with 120 live listeners, knowing that this episode will probably get 1,000 or more downloads, I mean, I'm ecstatic, and this has happened in the space of 4 months. So whilst, Jeff, I appreciate that you say that we deserve more listeners, I'm actually really ecstatic with what we've got, and the listeners we've got are loyal, and I love each and every one of them. And Blinky Cat says that maybe Aussie false flags don't pull viewers, and to an extent, I guess that's true, but of course, our biggest episode so far was episode 11, the one immediately following the Sydney siege, which is up to over 1,500 views now combined between the live and the official upload, which is just staggering stuff. I mean, if you're willing to sit here and talk the truth, give evidence for why you believe it, there are people out there who will listen, which is why on this show we always say to the listeners, hey, if I can do this, if Ethan can do this, if Jeff C over in Canada can do this, I think just about anyone could, and all it costs is a microphone and some of your time. And I'll tell you right now, anybody else who wants to do a show like this, we'll promote them, because we know how much the promotion from up north of the 49th and Brian Roberts and yourself, Jeff, and Red Pill, and even Press Reset, the amount of support that we've got from you guys has helped us to get to where we are, and that's exactly the kind of support that I would give anyone else who goes down this path. So to the listeners, if you've ever thought of doing a show like this, now's the time to do it, especially because we've just criticised that we shouldn't have criticised Ethan. This could be our last show. So 4 p.m. Brisbane time could be an opening slot for you guys if you want to sneak into it. Now, one final comment is from Otto K. Tam, and he asks, where's PK and why isn't he on the show? Well, I have, for my final thought, I've got some big news. I've been in touch with old mate PK, and I don't want to give away too much, but let's just say that we'll have another special guest on next week. He doesn't have quite the followers of Jeff C, and he probably isn't quite as musically talented, but it's fair to say that he's going to add just as much colour to the show. And Jeff, thank you so much for watching your language on the show. I forgot to ask you to do that at the start, actually. But you've done a fantastic job. The only risk with PK is if you ever want to introduce the show to family or friends, next week might not be the show, because I can't see us keeping him in line. PK is going to be joining the Australian Roundtable next week, 4 p.m. Brisbane time. So to Lindsay, great to have him back. Jeff C, thank you so much once again for all of your help and support, and hopefully you'll stick around for at least some of the Q&A. I know you're a bit tired, but I'm sure the questioners have some questions for you. Ethan, so thank you so much for all of your work and putting up with the 1 second delay on the earphones. We'll fix it up for next week, and we'll be good to go. And to all of our listeners, new and loyal, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for your time, giving the comments on the live chat. We really appreciate it. And this thing's only getting bigger and better, and it's thanks to people like you for spreading the word. So that's all I have to say for today. We're going to sign off right now. Again, live listeners, just stay on board. We'll get to the Q&A. But if you're listening to this upload on a podcast or the official upload later, the show's going to finish now. We'll see you again 4 p.m. Brisbane time next week for the Australian Roundtable Podcast. And thank you so much again to all the people who've been involved.
Thank you.